Hello, everyone, members of our network. Welcome to another topic, another episode of Real Estate Investing Podcast. Once again, we have our invited guest speaker, our primary investment loan advisor from our network, Mr. Richard Advani from Supreme Lending. And today he's going to talk about the two topics, a hot topic, if you will, that I personally have been receiving. I've been giving the input by our members. And the two questions they have for me, because many of our investors, they see the opportunity to buy rental properties. And as they look into their financial profile, their financial resources, some of our investors, they exhausted their down payment money from regular down payment money, and they are asking if they want to buy more rental properties, if they want to buy high cash flow properties in this pretty much a booming real estate market conditions we are experiencing. So they're asking two scenarios. So what is the pros and cons of for some investors, they have already accumulated a fair amount of rental property, and they have equity positions from their existing rental properties. So the question is, should they refinance their rental properties to tap the equity to buy more rental properties? And if so, what is the LTV? What's the loan value situation that they can do that? Because refinancing from a rental property, a non-owner occupied property, is a little bit more challenging, and the risk is higher, historically speaking. And then the other scenario, because many of our investors who owns a home in the Bay Area in California, especially most of our members of our network, they have a lot of equity from their principal home. So they're asking me, should I take out a home equity line of credit, or should I cash out, refinance my principal home to obtain 200 or 300 grand money to put those money into to finance multiple rental properties? And what are the pros and cons? What are the interest rate? What are the apple comparison on a numerical basis? So I know I touch on a lot of things, but so let's take a step back, allow Mr. Richard Advani, our loan advisor, just to slowly, methodically educate you guys what is the pros and cons of doing that. So without further ado, I'm running out of breath. Richard, take it away.
Thank you, Siwing. So yeah, as Siwing mentioned, given that a lot of us have, as investors, have purchased properties, 5, 7, 10, 12 years ago, a lot of us have built up a good amount of equity in the properties. So I'm here to talk about, firstly, different means and ways to tap some of that equity. But also, as Siwing mentioned, we all often get asked, our opinions at least on, leveraging properties where you have equity, whether it be rentals or whether it be primary homes. And I'm happy to share, of course, my opinion with that as well. And also, everyone has a different appetite, obviously, for risk. And I don't want to call it risk, but some people are okay with taking a little more leverage and other people aren't. And a lot of that really depends on where you may be in your life cycle as well, and as well as your working cycle. But the first thing I'll touch base on is obviously the different means to tap equity from a property, as well as the amount that you can generally expect to be able to tap from them. In general, there's two main ways to access equity from a property, whether it be your primary home or a rental, and that is either with a new first mortgage, where we pay off the existing mortgage on the home, as well as factor in some cash out to whatever amount you're looking for. Generally, for primary homes, you're limited at about 80% of the home's value in terms of cash out. So once again, if you took that first mortgage, we would pay off your existing first and then give you the additional cash out. Now, historically, obviously, that's the better option of the two options that we're going to cover, just because a first mortgage, inherently as it sounds, is in first lien position, which means it generally is a little less risky for the lender and will have lower interest rates overall. The other way that you could potentially access the equity is through a second mortgage or a home equity loan or line. Those are generally very good options as well. However, the terms are not quite as aggressive and competitive as they are in the first mortgages. So generally with home equity lines or second mortgages, the rates will be a little higher than first mortgages. And also they're not always fixed. They may be balloons or they may be adjustable rates. Now, for the most part, the only time you would consider a second mortgage over a first mortgage is if your first mortgage rate was dramatically lower than market rates, right? So let's say you owed $700,000 on your first mortgage on your primary home, and you were thinking of tapping $150,000 for some real estate investments. If your $700,000 was at a 4% rate and market rates were at 4.5%, it really wouldn't make sense to take that $150,000 out of that first mortgage, taking your interest rate from 4 to 4.5. Now, I use that as an example, but today it's actually quite the opposite. So most of our clients have rates, on their primary homes in the mid 3s to high 3% range, and a cash out loans today oftentimes are in the high 2% range or low 3% range. So more often than not, it is going to make more sense to access that capital from a first mortgage versus a second mortgage or a home equity line. Other times where you may use a home equity line in terms of, instead of a first mortgage is, let's say you weren't quite sure when you were going to deploy the funds, or let's say you were renovating a property and you didn't know whether it was going to cost $50,000 or $80,000, then a home equity line could be very beneficial for you because you only pay interest obviously on what you borrow and what you take. At the end of the day though, once you actually max out an equity line or a second mortgage, most people work to consolidate it with the first mortgage at that point anyways, just because once again, the first mortgage is going to have those lower interest rates. Now to talk about talk about rental properties, for single family investment properties, you can generally refinance up to 75% of the market value. Obviously that 75%, we subtract what you owe on the home now, and that leaves you with the additional cash out. Multi-units, if you own a multi-unit, those are a little lower at 70% loan to value. But either way, that obviously puts you in a position to where in most situations with how much a lot of the markets we've been working in have appreciated, that still should give you enough money for a down payment for a new purchase. So, when you pair the appreciation with the historic low interest rates that we have right now, there's no better time to really tap and access cash from properties. Leverage is a real key to building wealth. Obviously, you don't want to over leverage yourself or, pull so much cash out of these rentals so that you go negative on your payments. It is important to have, some sort of a buffer room, but it is a great time to take a look at property, see if re-leveraging makes sense. That way, of course, you can be a part of the record growth that we're seeing as it relates to, primary home sales, rentals, home sales. I mean, home sales in general are just through the roof. And I know most of the markets that C-Wing is working in, as well as myself, there's really not inventory. I mean, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, a lot of times it's really far out. So, when you do find an opportunity that's there, definitely act quick because it may not be there, a day or 2 days later, right, C-Wing?
Oh, absolutely right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I know another thing he kind of wanted me to touch on was, my opinion in terms of whether re-leveraging makes sense or doesn't make sense. And as I said earlier, a lot of that really is subjective. It depends, in my mind, on each individual situation. But more often than not, it does make sense. I think what we saw, in 2007, 2008 was people buying a lot of properties, for example, in California, just on the hopes that they were going to have appreciation, generally losing $500, $600, $800, $1,000 a month, but doing that in the hopes that a year later they would make $100,000, right, or $200,000 in appreciation. And a lot of people did that for a long time, and a lot of people re-leveraged those properties a year later instead of selling them. So that $1,000 a month loss that they were incurring now turned to $1,800, but they bought another property, right, that they were hoping was going to go up to, another hundreds of thousands of dollars. And while though that strategy worked for a lot of people for a while, it clearly was not a good strategy, and it was risky. And when values didn't go up, they were left with, owing a lot in mortgages and not having capital to make up for those negative rents that they had taken. So it was it was a very interesting way to invest, and in my mind, very risky. What's different today, especially as it relates to what we were talking about, the types of properties, is on these rentals, for example, all of us are cash flow positive in most of them. So, when you're talking about re-leveraging, you're going to re-leverage and leave yourself obviously still cash flow, but still leave breathing room over and above the cash flow to where you're getting a return on that investment. And now you're also getting a return on a new purchase and a new investment. The goal at the end of the day is return on investment. So, what C-Wing wants you to do is make sure that you're still going to leave enough equity. That way, the payment's low enough to where you are making a ROI on that property you're cashing out from, even after you cash out from it. But now you're going to use some of that money to make an ROI somewhere else. It's almost diversifying, that same property into two properties. So if done right, it absolutely can be a great strategy. People also ask whether it makes sense to leverage their personal home as it relates to purchasing real estate. And one thing I think important to note is the cheapest financing you can get, period, on a mortgage in terms of interest rates is your primary home. And primary home mortgage rates is the cheapest financing you can get anywhere, period, for any type of financing. And, you pair that once again with the fact that primary home rates a lot of times are in the high 2% range on, these Fannie Mae loans. And the inflation rate historically is 2%. I mean, it's almost really free money. So, if you've been on the fence about tapping into equity on any of your properties, the primary home, the rental, and if it makes sense for you, now is definitely the time to do it with where rates are. 1% lower than the lowest it's ever been really is a time and a cause for action.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's right. So furthermore, I'm sure as a loan agent, Richard also advised that for each property, you should, save as an emergency funds at least 6 months of your PITI, your mortgage taxes, taxes, insurance, principal, interest, taxes, insurance, PITI. For each property, for each rental you own, you should have 6 months of PITI on each property, just in case anything will happen to that. And that will further mitigate the risk of, having your portfolio be, subject to some risk if the market, take a dip or something, right? Right.
Yep, and those are the minimums generally. Yeah, it's pretty industry standard in the mortgage world to have, those 6 months per property. It actually changes a little bit as you go over 4 properties. But I would say again that's the minimum. It's a good idea, I think, to have even 8 to 10 months per property. That way you have some breathing room, you have some buffer. As C-Wing often knows, when you go through tenant switch, in the strategic markets we pick, I pick personally, and he picks obviously for his group, there isn't tons and tons of turnover, but inherently there generally is some small repairs that may be needed, or some repainting something or the other. So in addition to being able to absorb not having rent for a month and a half while it turns, having a little bit of money set aside for small things here and there on the property, I think is important.
Yeah. So, by the way, for those of you who are entertaining the idea of doing something like this, cash out refinance your rental properties, or take the equity out of your principal home. Before you do that, you have to run the numbers. And of course, Richard will be more than happy to consult with you, right? To help you make those informed decisions so you could mitigate your risk. And some people are thinking, oh, back in 2008 crash, a lot of people over leveraged on a mortgage. And as a result, that's why the crisis occurred, the recession and the real estate crash happened in 2008, 2009. But this is a topic for another, this is a subject for another topic. It'll take another 1 hour to talk about that. But in today's market condition, is extremely different. It's just, yeah, the chances of have a foreclosure wave, if you will, the next few years is pretty low, because this is different, and we're not gonna go over too much details about it. As a matter of fact, Richard, can you go quickly, from a very simple, very quick, high-level perspective, why today's real estate market we do not anticipate to see a huge foreclosure wave coming down the pipe?
Well, I think the biggest thing I can say, more than what we see coming down the pipe, because it's very subjective, is I can comment more on the difference between where we are today versus where we were at the peak of the last real estate trough, let's call it, or sorry, peak, and around 2007, 2008. And the biggest thing I'd say really comes down to my industry, right? In 2007 and 2008, which was shortly after I got in the industry, so don't blame me, guys. But in 2007, 2008, obviously we were at the end of a 10 or 11, 12-year economic boom, including real estate. The problem with that, though, a lot of what led to that boom was the fact that anyone with a good credit score and a heartbeat could buy a home, oftentimes with no money down, and oftentimes without even providing income documentation. It definitely was a scary time, but when there was a small blip in the economy, as you can imagine, people didn't have the means or ability to make the payments on these mortgages. And a lot of it wasn't because the economy turned around. It was because they never had the ability to make the payments in the first place. And they were, taking huge losses on buying real estate with the hopes that it was going to appreciate. And once again, they didn't even have the basic fundamentals to make those payments. And, lenders obviously shouldn't have been giving those types of loans to people. What's changed since then is Dodd-Frank and everything else that's happened since then. The rules and regulations around ability to repay, and what basically the federal government put rules forth to what lenders have to abide by, to make sure that people are qualified, and to make sure that we have done our diligence before we give people loans, and that they have enough income to make the payments. So look, you can't stand here and say a major recession is not going to affect every industry, stocks, housing, import, export. It's going to affect everything. But is real estate going to be the cause of it, or the major sufferer from it this time around? In my opinion, probably not, just because the fundamentals on which people got loans and loans were given to people are a lot stronger. And, I think real estate, obviously, as we all know, is probably what led to the last major financial crash. But all of those bad habits and bad things that lenders were doing have ceased as of a long time ago. And people who have mortgages are better qualified and should be in good positions to continue to make those payments, even if the economy does turn around a little. So.
Yep, great information, Richard. As we are about to conclude on this podcast, so what I hear you saying from the big picture, what we discussed today is that, again, my recommendation is, if you have cash from savings and stock liquidation as a primary source of a down payment to finance your investment property, use that first tier money first, right? Then when you potentially exhaust that bucket of money, then if you'll continue to be motivated and you're able to do well on your initial purchase of properties, if you want to do more, if you want to buy more, and you have equity from your rentals and you have equity from your home, by all means, do your research, do your due diligence, crunch the numbers, right? Look at the interest rate, the cost of borrowing and all that. At the end of the day, we believe, and Richard believe, that the risk is not as high as you think. But then again, risk is a matter of people's opinions and feelings and how they feel about it, how much risk they're willing to take. But yeah, it's an individual situation. Each investor have to understand their goals and objectives, their motivation, their risk tolerance, of how to balance the risk versus the reward, and make informed decisions that really make sense to you as an individual. So we're not giving you any recommendation. Richard and I, we do what we do. We just help you, educate you on those kind of scenarios, and then it's up to you and up to your financial advisor or your legal or your tax person to help you make those informed decisions. So you know the expectation, you know what you are getting yourself into, to mitigate your financial resources. So
Yep.
yeah.
And I know C-Wing will probably include my contact information somewhere on the video or in the description. If you guys are interested in exploring some options to leverage some of the equity in your home or your rentals, feel free to reach out. Also, if you have any investment properties over 4.5%, give or take, or if you have a primary home over 3.5%, it definitely makes sense to call us for a free refinance consultation. We don't need to run your credit. We're just going to have a quick conversation, get some information about the property, and then send you a proposal. That way you can review it and determine if it makes sense for you. Other than that, thank you for having me again, C-Wing. Look forward to doing these.
You're welcome, Richard. Thank you once again. Appreciate your time. Have a nice day, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.